Marcus woke up to the gentle sound of birds singing outside his window. The morning sun slipped through the curtains, filling his small but cozy room with warm light. For him, mornings always carried a sense of calm, but this day was more special than others. Today, he would once again take a look at something that had been his dream for many years, a dream that he worked day and night for, saving every extra penny, and never losing hope even when things got tough. That dream now sat quietly in his garage, his brand new car. Marcus had grown up in a simple family, where luxury was rare but love was plenty. His parents had taught him the value of hard work, respect, and patience. For years, he worked double shifts at the restaurant where he was employed, smiling at every customer, even when he was tired, even when his feet hurt from standing too long. Each tip he received, each little bonus he earned, he tucked away carefully. While others around him spent on temporary joys, Marcus kept his eyes on a long-term goal. His heart was set on owning a car that reflected not just style but his journey of effort and sacrifice. Finally, after years of saving and planning, Marcus signed the papers just a month ago. That moment when the keys were placed in his hand had filled him with pride that words could not capture. The sleek black car wasn't just a vehicle, it was a symbol of every late night he had worked, every meal he had skipped to save money, and every moment he had chosen discipline over giving up. This morning, he brewed himself a simple cup of coffee, sitting quietly at his small kitchen table. He looked out the window and thought about how far he had come. For him, life had never been about showing off. It was about cherishing the little victories that came after great struggle. He finished his coffee, set the cup aside, and grabbed his keys. A sense of quiet joy filled him as he walked toward the garage. The neighborhood was calm that day. The sound of sprinklers came from nearby lawns, and a couple of joggers passed by on the street, waving politely. Marcus lived in a neighborhood where most people kept to themselves. Some were friendly, while others hardly noticed him. But that never bothered him. He liked peace, and his home gave him exactly that. As he reached the garage door, Marcus took a deep breath, almost as if preparing himself to see a dear friend. He pressed the button, and the door slowly lifted, letting in the sunlight. There it was, the car, polished and shining, sitting like a crown jewel in its place. Its smooth lines reflected the morning rays, making it look even more beautiful. Marcus couldn't help but smile. He stepped closer, running his hand lightly across the hood, feeling the cool metal under his palm. In that moment, memories of his hard journey flashed before him. He thought about the nights when he returned home exhausted, about the times when he had to say no to friends' outings just to save money, and about the doubts that sometimes tried to creep in, telling him it might never happen. But here it was, right in front of him, proof that perseverance always pays off. As he stood there, he imagined the road trips he would take, the quiet drives at night with soft music playing, and the comfort of not having to depend on buses or rides from others. He pictured his parents smiling at him, proud of their son who had turned his dreams into reality through sheer determination. Marcus opened the driver's side door and sat inside. The fresh scent of the leather greeted him, reminding him that this car was still new. He placed his hands on the steering wheel and leaned back in the seat. A wave of peace washed over him. He didn't even need to drive anywhere at that moment. Just sitting there felt like an achievement, like a reward for all the years he had never given up. After a few minutes, he started the engine, and the gentle hum made him smile wider. He didn't want to disturb the quiet street, so he let it run for only a short while. He turned it off, stepped back out, and closed the door gently. His heart felt light, as though the car had given him more than just convenience, it had given him confidence. He stood in front of the garage, stretching a little, when he noticed a few people walking their dogs. They gave casual nods as they passed by, and Marcus returned their greetings with a friendly smile. Life felt ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. Ordinary, because it was just another morning. Extraordinary, because he knew what that car represented. Marcus was not the type of man to seek attention. He didn't flaunt his achievements or speak loudly about his success. He liked to keep things simple, quietly carrying his pride in his heart. To him, the joy of owning this car was personal, not something to prove to anyone else. Still, he couldn't deny that he felt grateful to be able to finally park something so meaningful in his own garage. Many times in the past, he had admired such cars from a distance, telling himself that one day, if he worked hard enough, he might earn the same. And now, that day had arrived. As the morning breeze brushed against his face, Marcus decided he would take the car out for a short drive later in the day. For now, he simply wanted to stand there, taking it all in. He leaned against the side of the garage, looking at the car, sipping from a bottle of water he had brought along. He thought about how life rewards patience, how dreams may take time but are never out of reach for those who keep moving forward. The neighborhood remained calm, with the faint sounds of children playing in the distance. Marcus smiled at the thought of perhaps one day having his own family, where he could share such simple joys with loved ones. For now, though, it was enough to stand here, in front of his home, beside the car he had longed for, and simply feel thankful. Little did Marcus know, this peaceful morning was about to change. What he saw as a symbol of pride and accomplishment would soon be misjudged by someone else. But for now, in that stillness, he was just a man enjoying the fruit of his labor, unaware of the storm that was about to come knocking at his door. Marcus closed the garage door halfway, still holding his keys in his hand, when he heard footsteps approaching from across the street. He glanced up and noticed a woman walking quickly in his direction. She was dressed neatly, her hair pulled back tightly, and in one hand she carried a small notepad, as though she had been checking something before coming over. Marcus had seen her before. Her name was Karen, a member of the Homeowners Association, someone who often walked around the neighborhood making notes about lawns, mailboxes, and parked cars. She rarely smiled and often looked at neighbors with suspicion. At first, Marcus thought nothing of it. He assumed she was out on her usual morning walk or maybe checking on some small rule in the community. But her steps were sharp, her expression stern, and her eyes fixed directly on him and the car. Marcus gave her a polite nod, a simple gesture of friendliness, but she didn't return it. Instead, she stopped at the end of his driveway, staring at the car as though it did not belong there. "You shouldn't be here," she said firmly, her voice carrying a tone that suggested authority. Marcus raised an eyebrow, unsure of what she meant. "Excuse me," he asked calmly. "That car," she said, pointing directly at the shiny black vehicle in the garage. "I know it. I just bought it. And you have no business touching it." Marcus was stunned. For a moment, he thought he had misheard her. Surely, she couldn't be serious. But the firmness in her voice, the way her eyes narrowed, and the anger in her stance told him she believed every word she was saying. "Ma'am," Marcus began slowly, trying to keep his voice respectful, "this car belongs to me. I bought it last month. I have the papers inside, I can show you." But Karen shook her head vigorously. "Don't play games with me. I know what I saw at the dealership. That car is mine. You must have taken it somehow." Her voice was growing louder, carrying across the quiet street. A few neighbors who had been walking their dogs or watering their plants now turned their heads, curious about the commotion. Marcus felt a tightness in his chest. He wasn't worried about the truth. He knew he had every document to prove ownership, but he worried about how quickly situations could be misunderstood when emotions were high. "Look," Marcus said softly, raising his hand slightly to show calmness, "I understand you may be confused, but this car is registered in my name. I worked very hard to get it. If you give me a moment, I can bring out the title and paperwork for you to see." But Karen didn't listen. Instead, her face grew red, and she stepped closer to the driveway. "Don't lie to me," she shouted. I'm not stupid. I know what I own, and you are stealing from me right now. Marcus could hardly believe what was happening. Here he was, standing in front of his own garage, being accused of stealing his own car. He wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, but the seriousness in her tone reminded him this wasn't a small misunderstanding, it was escalating. Before he could speak again, Karen pulled out her phone. With quick fingers, she dialed 911. Marcus's heart sank. He knew the weight of those numbers, how powerful and dangerous a single phone call could be when someone made a false report. He felt a rush of worry, not for himself alone but for the entire situation spiraling out of control. Karen put the phone to her ear and began speaking loudly. Yes, hello. I need the police immediately. There's a man here stealing my car. Yes, right now, in front of my house. He's in the garage. Yes, I can see him. Hurry, please. Her words struck Marcus like cold wind. She was describing him as a criminal, turning a peaceful morning into a scene of accusation and drama. He looked around and saw more neighbors stepping out onto their porches, whispering among themselves. Some frowned in confusion, others simply watched in silence. Marcus could feel all eyes on him, as though the weight of judgment was already falling before anyone had heard his side. He took a deep breath and tried to steady himself. The last thing he wanted was to respond with anger. He had always believed in dignity and patience, even in moments of unfairness. He reminded himself of his parents' teachings: the truth always stands, no matter how loudly lies are shouted. Karen was still on the phone, her voice rising with each sentence. He's tall, wearing a gray shirt. Yes, he's right here. He looks like he's trying to get away. Send officers quickly. Marcus shook his head. He hadn't moved an inch from where he stood. He kept his hands visible, trying to look as calm as possible, though inside, his heart beat fast. He wanted to shout, to demand that she stop lying, but he knew that wouldn't help. Instead, he spoke in a steady voice, though she wasn't listening. Ma'am, please. This car is mine. I can prove it. You don't need to do this. Karen snapped her head toward him. We'll see about that, she hissed, lowering the phone after giving the operator the address. The police will sort this out. Then you'll regret what you've done. Marcus looked at the car again, the same car that had brought him so much joy just minutes earlier. Now, it stood as the center of a storm he never asked for. He felt a deep sadness, not because he doubted the truth, but because he realized how quickly people could assume the worst about someone simply because of who they were or what they looked like. More neighbors gathered, forming a small circle at a distance, their whispers filling the air. Some looked sympathetic, others seemed unsure, and a few crossed their arms as though waiting for the police to confirm Karen's story. Marcus stood tall, trying to meet their eyes, hoping his calmness would speak louder than the accusations flying against him. He thought about going inside to fetch the documents immediately, but something told him not to move. In tense moments like these, even a small action could be twisted into something else. So he stayed right there, hands visible, shoulders straight, waiting for the sound of sirens that he knew would arrive soon. Time seemed to slow down. The once peaceful neighborhood was now filled with tension, and Marcus felt like every second stretched longer than the last. He took a deep breath, whispering to himself, "Stay calm. The truth will come out." For Karen, though, there was no patience. She stood with her arms folded, tapping her foot, glaring at him as if she had already won some unseen battle. Her confidence puzzled Marcus. How could she be so sure of something so untrue? He couldn't understand her thinking, but he didn't try. He focused instead on what he could control: his composure, his respect, his dignity. In the distance, the faint wail of sirens began to grow louder. The moment Marcus had been dreading was drawing closer. He glanced once more at his car, then at the sky above, steadying himself for what was about to unfold. The morning that had begun with peace and gratitude was now a stage for conflict and accusation. And while Marcus knew the truth was on his side, he also knew that sometimes, the road to justice was not as simple as showing papers or speaking calmly. He would soon learn how far patience and truth could carry him in the face of loud voices and false claims. The sound of sirens grew louder until it filled the quiet street. What had once been a calm morning now felt like a stage where everyone was holding their breath. Marcus stood in the driveway, his hands still at his sides, his body calm but his heart racing. He knew the truth, yet he also knew how easily false words could shape the moment before truth had a chance to speak. Karen stood proudly near the edge of the driveway, her phone still clutched in her hand as though it was her badge of authority. She glanced at the neighbors who had gathered, her chin lifted, as if inviting them to see how she had saved the neighborhood from a supposed crime. Her eyes never left Marcus, though they studied him like he was a puzzle she had already solved, like her story was already the only version of events that mattered. When the police cars pulled up, the flashing lights colored the street red and blue. Doors opened, and two officers stepped out, their movements firm, their expressions serious. The sight of uniforms and flashing lights drew even more neighbors out of their homes. Some stood at their fences, others came to the sidewalk, their whispers rising and falling like waves. Karen rushed toward the officers before Marcus could even take a step. She waved her arms dramatically, pointing back toward the garage. "That's him," she exclaimed. "That man right there. He's stealing my car. He was caught red-handed. I told you to come quickly." The officers exchanged a glance, then looked toward Marcus. He stood still, his posture straight, his face calm, though his eyes revealed the weight of the moment. He didn't move closer, didn't raise his voice. He had lived long enough to know that how he carried himself now mattered more than any words that had been shouted against him. One officer began walking toward him while the other stayed with Karen, asking her questions. Marcus kept his eyes steady on the approaching officer. When the officer stopped a few feet away, Marcus spoke in a low, clear voice. "Good morning, officer. My name is Marcus. I live here. That car in the garage belongs to me. I have the documents inside the house that prove it." The officer studied him carefully, his hand resting near his belt but not reaching for anything. "We got a call that this vehicle was being stolen," the officer said. "I understand," Marcus replied softly. "But that call was wrong. I bought this car last month. Everything is in my name. If you'd like, I can get the title and registration for you." Meanwhile, Karen's voice carried from behind, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Don't believe him. He's lying. That car is mine. I saw him trying to drive it off before you arrived. He's smooth, but don't let him fool you." The officer near her nodded slowly, writing notes on a small pad. But a few neighbors shook their heads quietly, whispering to each other. Some of them had seen Marcus open the garage every morning to check on his car. Others remembered when the delivery truck had brought it to his home just weeks earlier. They looked at Karen's anger, then at Marcus's calmness, and some began to doubt her story. Marcus could feel the weight of all their eyes. The tension pressed on him like a heavy blanket. But he kept breathing deeply, steadying himself. He thought again of his parents' words, of how truth stands even when shadows try to cover it. The officer in front of him finally spoke again. "Do you have the keys to the vehicle on you?" "Yes," Marcus said, lifting them slowly from his pocket so that the officer could see. The keys glinted in the sunlight. "I can also start the car for you, if you'd like." The officer gave a short nod. Marcus walked calmly to the driver's side, pressed the unlock button, and opened the door. He sat down inside and turned the key. The engine purred to life smoothly, its sound filling the driveway. The officer leaned slightly forward, nodding at the proof. Karen, however, grew louder. "That proves nothing," she shouted. He probably had another key made. Don't you see? Thieves are clever. That car is mine. Her words hung in the air, but they no longer carried the same weight. Neighbors began exchanging glances, their doubt spreading. Some even muttered softly, "That's his car. He's had it for weeks." The officer closest to Karen asked her to describe the paperwork she had for the car. She stammered, her words suddenly less sharp. "Well, I don't have the papers right now. But I know what I bought. I know it's mine." Her voice cracked, just slightly, but enough for those listening to notice. Marcus turned off the engine and stepped out of the car again, keeping his voice calm and even. "Officer, if you'll allow me, I can bring the documents from inside. They're in a folder near my desk. The title, the registration, and even the receipt from the dealership. Everything matches my name." The officer nodded again, this time with more trust in his voice. "Go ahead. We'll wait here." Marcus walked slowly into the house. As he stepped inside, he felt the weight of the situation settle on him more deeply. He wasn't angry, but he was saddened. Saddened that a moment of peace had turned into a scene of accusation simply because someone chose not to believe what their eyes could already see. He grabbed the folder, took another deep breath, and returned outside. The crowd seemed larger now, more neighbors having stepped out to watch. He handed the folder to the officer, who opened it and carefully read through each document. Marcus stood silently, hands clasped in front of him, waiting. The officer nodded after each page, the title, the registration, the dealership receipt, all in Marcus's name, with the car's make, model, and VIN number matching perfectly. Finally, the officer closed the folder and handed it back. "Everything checks out," he said, his voice steady. "This vehicle belongs to you." The words carried across the street like a breeze, soft but undeniable. The neighbors murmured, some nodding, some glancing at Karen with puzzled expressions. Her face turned red, her lips tightening as she struggled to find more words. "He must have tricked someone," she muttered weakly. "This doesn't make sense." But her voice had lost its strength. The officers now looked at her with less patience, and one of them quietly told her to step aside. Marcus stood quietly, not gloating, not smiling. He didn't need victory. All he needed was the truth to be seen, and now it had been. Still, the heaviness in his chest didn't leave. It was never easy to be doubted, never easy to be treated as less than honest. The neighbors began to drift back to their homes, some stopping briefly to give Marcus small nods of support. A few even whispered words like, "Sorry about that," as they passed. Marcus acknowledged them with a gentle smile, though his heart still felt the sting. The officers, satisfied with the proof, prepared to leave. One of them gave Marcus a respectful nod, silently acknowledging his calmness through the entire ordeal. The flashing lights faded as the cars pulled away, leaving the street once again in quiet sunlight. Marcus stood there in front of his garage, the car gleaming beside him, but the joy from earlier was gone. What had been a symbol of pride now carried the memory of an accusation he never deserved. He closed the garage door slowly, almost as if protecting the car from further misunderstanding. Then he walked back inside his home, setting the folder on his desk with careful hands. For a long moment, he stood by the window, looking out at the street. Life had returned to normal, but inside him, the morning's peace had been broken. He whispered softly to himself, "The truth will always stand. That's enough." But deep down, he knew the moment would linger. Not because the truth wasn't seen, but because the accusation had been shouted so loudly that it left a shadow on what should have been a morning of joy. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, casting longer shadows across the street, but the tension from what had just happened still lingered like a heavy cloud. Marcus stood quietly near his front door, the folder of documents resting safely back inside his house. His calm face hid the weight in his chest, while his car, still gleaming in the driveway, looked like a silent witness to everything that had unfolded. Karen, however, was not ready to step back. Though the police had already confirmed Marcus as the rightful owner, she lingered in the street, pacing, shaking her head, and muttering to herself. A few neighbors who hadn't left yet stood nearby, watching her with a mix of confusion and discomfort. Some whispered quietly, while others looked toward Marcus with supportive nods. Marcus noticed all of this through the window, but he stayed still, leaning against the wall inside his home. He could hear faint sounds outside Karen's insistent voice and the murmurs of neighbors, but he decided not to step out again. He thought it better to let the storm pass. One of the officers, before leaving, had given Karen a firm warning about filing false reports. His voice had been polite but clear. "Ma'am, calling 911 for false claims is serious. If this continues, you could face consequences. Please think carefully before making accusations." The words had made Karen flinch, but she hadn't responded directly. Now, left in the open with her neighbors watching, Karen tried to regain her confidence. She raised her chin and said loudly, "You all just don't understand. Something about this doesn't feel right. Maybe the papers are fake. Maybe he tricked the dealership. People do these things." Her words floated across the street, but they no longer carried the weight they once had. Neighbors exchanged glances, and some shook their heads. One older man, Mr. Jenkins, who had lived in the community for decades, finally spoke up. He stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. "Karen," he said, "I saw that car delivered here myself. I was in my yard that morning. The truck came, and Marcus signed the papers right in front of the driver. He's had that car since then. There's no trick. You've made a mistake, and you need to accept it." The air grew quiet after his words. Karen's lips tightened, and her eyes darted away, but she didn't respond. Another neighbor, a woman named Mrs. Lopez, added softly, "He's always been a good neighbor. Quiet, respectful. I've seen him washing that car every weekend since it arrived. We should be celebrating his hard work, not accusing him of something he didn't do." Marcus heard these words from inside, and though he didn't step out, a gentle warmth filled his heart. For the first time that morning, he felt the sting of injustice being softened by kindness. His neighbors were speaking truth not because they had to, but because they chose to. Karen, however, was not ready to let go. Her pride held her firmly, and her voice, though weaker now, rose again. "You're all blind. I know what I saw at the dealership. That car looks exactly like the one I bought." He must have found a way, but her words were cut off by another voice. It was Mr. Patel, a quiet man who rarely spoke in public, but who now stepped forward. "Karen," he said gently, "sometimes what we think we see is not the truth. Sometimes we let our assumptions guide us instead of facts." The officers checked everything. "The papers are clear. Let this go." The group of neighbors nodded in agreement. The weight of their united voices left Karen standing alone, her arms folded, her face flushed. She opened her mouth to speak again, but no words came. For the first time, her confidence seemed to crumble. Marcus finally decided to step outside. He opened his door slowly and walked onto the porch. The neighbors turned to him, and silence fell for a moment. He looked at them with calm eyes, then glanced briefly at Karen before speaking softly. "I don't want trouble," he said. "I just want to live here peacefully, like everyone else. This car, it means a lot to me. Not because it's shiny or expensive, but because I worked for years to make it mine. I don't need to prove my worth to anyone, but I do want to be treated with the same respect I try to give all of you." His words were simple, but they carried weight. The neighbors nodded, some with guilt in their eyes for having doubted him, others with admiration for his calmness. Even those who had remained silent now shifted uncomfortably, realizing how unfair the morning had been. Karen looked at him for a long moment, her lips pressed tightly together. Her eyes flickered with a mix of frustration and embarrassment. But instead of apologizing, she simply turned and walked quickly back to her house, her shoulders stiff. The neighbors stood quietly, watching her leave. Then, slowly, they turned back to Marcus. Some approached him, offering kind words. "Sorry you had to go through that," Mr. Jenkins said, patting his shoulder gently. Mrs. Lopez added, "You handled it with more grace than most of us could. Don't let this morning take away your joy." Marcus gave them small, grateful smiles. "Thank you," he said softly. "It means a lot to hear that." As the neighbors drifted back to their homes, Marcus stood alone in the driveway again. He looked at the car, shining in the sunlight, and felt a mixture of emotions. There was pride, yes, but also sadness. What should have been a simple moment of joy had been clouded by false judgment. Still, the support from his neighbors reminded him that truth has a way of rising, even when lies shout loudly. Later that afternoon, Marcus sat by his window, sipping tea and watching the quiet street return to normal. Children rode their bicycles, dogs barked at squirrels, and sprinklers turned on in neat patterns across green lawns. Life seemed ordinary again, but Marcus knew the morning had left a mark on everyone. Karen's house remained silent, her blinds drawn. Perhaps she was embarrassed, perhaps angry, but Marcus didn't waste energy guessing. He reminded himself that carrying bitterness would only steal his own peace. Instead, he focused on gratitude for his car, for his home, for the few neighbors who had stood up for him. As evening settled in, Marcus went out once more, this time taking his car for a gentle drive. The engine hummed smoothly, and the road stretched open before him. He turned the radio on softly, letting the music fill the silence. With each mile, the heaviness of the morning began to fade, replaced by the simple joy of driving something he had earned. The sky turned golden as the sun lowered, painting the world in warm light. Marcus rolled the window down, letting the breeze wash over him. He smiled quietly to himself, realizing that no matter how loud false accusations might be, truth and patience had guided him through. Back in the neighborhood, his absence left a silence that spoke louder than Karen's earlier shouts. Neighbors reflected on what they had seen, some even discussing quietly with their families about the importance of not rushing to judgment. The morning had taught them all something, even if uncomfortably. By the time Marcus returned and parked his car safely in the garage, the stars had begun to appear in the night sky. He stood for a moment, looking up at them, feeling a calmness settle over him once more. Then he closed the garage door gently and walked inside his home, carrying with him the quiet strength of someone who had faced falsehood with dignity and allowed truth to shine. The morning after the incident, the neighborhood felt different, though the streets looked the same. There was a quiet sense of awareness that lingered, as if everyone had been reminded that appearances could be misleading, and judgments could be wrong. Marcus woke up early, as he often did, to the soft light spilling through his window. His thoughts drifted back to the events of the previous day, and he felt a mixture of relief, fatigue, and determination. Relief because the truth had come out, fatigue from the stress of being falsely accused, and determination to continue living his life with dignity. He went about his morning routine slowly, making a cup of coffee and opening the blinds to greet the day. His car sat in the driveway, polished and untouched, a symbol not just of hard work but of patience and perseverance. Marcus smiled as he thought about how quickly things could escalate when assumptions were made. It was a lesson, he realized, for both him and the people around him. As he stepped outside to water his small garden, he noticed a few neighbors already up. Some waved politely, others came closer to exchange greetings. A few older residents even stopped to ask how he was feeling after the chaotic morning. "You're handling this well," Mrs. Lopez said with a gentle smile. "Many would have lost their temper. We admire your calmness." Marcus thanked her quietly, appreciating the genuine concern. "It's not about anger," he said softly. "It's about making sure the truth speaks louder than fear or assumptions. Yesterday was difficult, but it also reminded me of what really matters, living with honesty and kindness." As the day continued, Marcus noticed a subtle shift in how neighbors interacted with one another. Conversations were quieter, more thoughtful. People were paying attention to the facts before speaking. Even Karen, though she stayed behind closed doors, seemed to have left a mark on everyone's awareness. They realized that a single misunderstanding could stir tension, and that patience, listening, and verification were essential in any community. Later in the afternoon, Marcus received a knock on his door. It was Mr. Jenkins, holding a small package wrapped neatly in brown paper. "Morning, Marcus," he said with a warm smile. "Thought you might enjoy this. A little something from the community." Marcus opened the package carefully and found a small plant, a symbol of growth and renewal. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "This means a lot. It's a reminder that even after a storm, new life can grow." Mr. Jenkins nodded. "Exactly. And we wanted to apologize, too. Some of us didn't speak up early enough. We let assumptions guide us instead of looking at the full picture. That was wrong." Marcus shook his head gently. "It's not about blame," he said. "We all learned something. You all stood by truth when it mattered, and that matters more than anything else." The afternoon passed peacefully, and by evening, a few children from the neighborhood came by to see Marcus's car. They had watched the morning's chaos unfold from their yards, and curiosity had gotten the better of them. Marcus crouched down to talk to them, smiling as he explained the basics of the car, how it worked, and the importance of respecting other people's property and privacy. "You see," he said gently, "just because something looks like it belongs to you or someone else doesn't mean it's true. Always ask questions, check facts, and be kind. Don't jump to conclusions." The children listened closely, absorbing his words. One little boy, wide-eyed, nodded seriously. "I get it. We should think first before saying things." "Yes," Marcus replied, smiling. "That's right. And always remember that everyone deserves respect, no matter who they are or what they own." As night fell, Marcus sat on his porch with a soft breeze brushing against his face. He reflected on the week's events and felt a quiet satisfaction. The incident with Karen had tested his patience and resolve, but it had also revealed the strength of his character and the integrity of those around him who chose to see the truth. A few days later, the neighborhood began to feel more connected than ever. The incident sparked conversations among residents about community values, understanding, and empathy. Some neighbors organized a small gathering to discuss ways to support each other better, share concerns openly, and avoid misunderstandings in the future. Marcus, though quiet and humble, was invited as a guest of honor. He attended, not to speak much, but to show that a calm presence and respect for others could influence positive change. During the gathering, Karen stayed away, but the community discussed the events respectfully. The conversation did not focus on shame or blame but on learning. "We need to trust each other and not assume the worst," one neighbor said. "We saw yesterday how quickly fear and prejudice can take over." Another added, "It's important to remember that everyone has their own story. We shouldn't judge what we don't fully understand." Marcus listened quietly, nodding. Though Karen's actions had caused distress, he realized that anger or revenge would not bring peace. His life was his own, and peace was his choice. Over the next few weeks, life returned to its usual rhythm, but Marcus noticed subtle improvements in the neighborhood. People greeted each other more warmly, conversations were more patient, and there was a renewed sense of respect. Even small gestures like offering a helping hand with groceries, holding doors, or waving during morning walks carried more meaning than before. The incident had sparked a wave of self-awareness that made the community stronger. Marcus, too, felt the change within himself. He had always been a person who valued honesty and patience, but the events with Karen reminded him of the importance of inner strength. He understood that not everyone would always act rightly, but responding with grace could create ripples that reached far beyond the moment. One evening, as he parked his car in the driveway after a day at work, he noticed Karen's house. The lights were dim, and the blinds remained closed. Marcus felt no anger, no need for confrontation. He simply understood that her actions were a reflection of her own struggles and insecurities, not a reflection of his worth. Instead, he turned his attention to his own home, to the life he had built, and to the future he could shape. He spent time with his hobbies, reading books he loved, tending to his garden, and sharing small moments with neighbors who had become friends. The car, once a source of conflict, became a symbol of perseverance, a reminder that patience and truth could prevail even in difficult circumstances. A month later, Marcus received a letter from the Homeowners Association, confirming that no further complaints had been filed against him. The letter emphasized the importance of respecting all residents and their property. It was a small acknowledgement, but for Marcus, it symbolized closure. The tension had faded, replaced by a sense of justice and community awareness. As the seasons changed, Marcus continued to live his life quietly and respectfully. He became a role model for the neighborhood, not through grand gestures, but through consistency, integrity, and the gentle strength he had shown during the incident. Children who had watched the events unfold now waved to him with smiles, and adults approached him for advice, admiration, or simply a friendly conversation. Even Karen eventually rejoined the neighborhood routine, though from a distance. Marcus did not seek reconciliation, but he treated her presence with neutral respect. His focus remained on living a life guided by truth, kindness, and patience. Over time, the memories of that chaotic morning became less about embarrassment or fear and more about lessons learned for him, his neighbors, and even those who had doubted him. One quiet evening, Marcus stood on his porch and looked at the street. The soft glow of the setting sun reflected on his car, and he felt a deep sense of contentment. He understood that life would always present challenges, misunderstandings, and moments of conflict, but he had learned that facing them with calmness and integrity could turn even the most difficult situations into opportunities for growth. The neighborhood had changed, not dramatically, but subtly. People smiled more, listened better, and judged less quickly. They remembered Marcus's example and the morning when assumptions had almost overshadowed truth. That day had left a permanent mark, a reminder that respect, patience, and understanding were more powerful than fear, prejudice, or rash judgment. Marcus smiled to himself as he returned to his home, closing the door gently behind him. The car, shining in the driveway, stood as a quiet witness to the trials he had faced and the lessons he had shared without words. He had endured, he had persevered, and he had grown stronger. And in that quiet strength, he found peace, a peace that no misunderstanding, accusation, or fear could ever take away.